So we call that our Zoom collect.
Awesome. So good.
The floor is yours, Danielle. Thank you for being with us today.
Thank you so much. I'm going to share my screen. Is that okay? All right. So good to see each and every one of you here on today. I'm going to share some slides with you, and also I'm going to ask that if you don't have pen and paper handy, please grab pen and paper, as I'll be giving some information to you during this time. And please keep me on time. Please keep me on the time schedule. You never put a microphone in a preacher's hand.
Yeah.
First things first, when we talk about spiritual care, what's the first thoughts that jump out in your mind when we talk about spiritual care? How are we used to providing spiritual care for people? What does that really mean?
I think of meeting people where they are.
Awesome. Meeting people where they are. Okay, other thoughts? Thank you for that. I'm sorry, my friend, you're on mute. I think you're saying something is really profound. Can you repeat it?
I thought I had unmuted and actually I had muted. I think of being present with and to people.
Yes, thank you. Yes. Being present with and to people, most definitely. Anybody else? Okay. Oftentimes, for many of us, when we think about spiritual care, we primarily think about such issues as faith or theology, or how we understand spirit or religion. And so I venture to say we have to expand our definition or understanding of spiritual care. I say in 2022, that definition of spiritual care is limited, if you will. And I'll get into some specific reasons in a moment. On this image, you see 4 circles: blue circle, green circle, and a purple circle. And I am proposing that we reimagine spiritual care in some sense. We are oftentimes used to hanging out in that purple circle you see, where our profession has taught us that our job as people of faith, as clergy persons, is to offer care that meets the soul needs or the soul concerns of people today. And I venture to say, in 2022, we have to do more. I venture to say that spiritual care is really also adding that blue and green circle to how we care for people. So I propose that our spiritual care must take into consideration one's body needs and one's mind needs. What do I mean by that? I'll get into specifics in a moment. I propose that spiritual care must be holistic. And so the title of this presentation for us today is, how do we care for our whole self? How do we care for our whole self? And I believe that a cool acronym that I created was SELF, where the S stands for social needs or social concerns that people have. The E stands for emotional concerns that people have. And the L stands for life meaning and purpose needs or concerns that people have. And then finally, the F stands for faith needs or faith concerns that people have. And so in some sense, I am asserting that people today have 4 needs or 4 concerns that they wrestle with. Social needs, emotional needs, life meaning and purpose needs, and faith needs. And so our job as chaplains or pastors or pastoral counselors or therapists or even active laity is to somehow discern how do we offer holistic care by caring for the 4 specific needs that all persons have. Now, a disclaimer is I used to think that there were only particular persons that have these types of needs. And then after reflecting and meeting with persons, I began to be challenged on this, where a couple of people say, you know, Danielle, I think all persons, regardless of race, ethnicity, gender, sexual orientation, all persons have these 4 type of needs. And so I began to expand my vision of who this model is applicable for and said, you know, this is applicable for a wide range of persons. And so I'm going to cite some statistics for particular groups of people, but I'd also like to invite you to think about how does these statistics or particular socioeconomic conditions impact a wide range of persons today. So let's talk about our blue circle, social needs first. I'll pause for a moment. When I say social needs, what's some thoughts that jump out in your mind when I say many people today wrestle with particular social needs? What jumps out in your mind when I say that?
Sharing ideas.
Say it one more time.
Sharing ideas.
Okay. How is sharing ideas of social need? Can you say more about that, Barbara? Thank you.
You get to talk about things you're thinking about and hear what other people are hearing and doing. You understand other people better too.
Thank you. Other thoughts? What social needs do people wrestle with today?
Well, one of them that we've all dealt with during COVID especially is isolation.
Ah, yes, isolation.
Especially for our older folks.
Yes. Thank you. Anyone else?
I'd say access to healthcare and just all the basic needs, access, healthcare equity, access to housing, access to, the food sustainability, education, being able to access education with some sort of equity. Yeah, I noticed you said body. I like the connection of body and social. The embodied, your work's starting to remind me of Dr. Katie Geneva Cannon's work, where she speaks about the embodied ethic and holistic ethic. So I'm already loving your work. So
Thank you. When we talk about social needs, we have to think about what we often call is the realms of trauma or ACEs. Realms of trauma or ACEs. ACEs stands for adverse childhood experiences. And so what we're now discovering is people have social needs based on three primary ACEs that all persons have experienced in their life from childhood into adulthood. What do I mean by that? First, let me talk about what are ACEs. ACEs is acronym for Adverse Childhood Experiences. And we say there are three realms or types of ACEs or traumas that people experience. One trauma or ACEs is that which happens in the household. As you can see on this image, the tree and the leaves in the tree. We say these are household traumas that many people wrestle with today that create social needs. These are household traumas that create one type of social need or one set of dynamics under social needs. So a person may be grieving or wrestling with divorce, homelessness, parental mental illness, alcoholism and drug abuse, emotional and sexual abuse, domestic violence, maternal depression, bullying, physical and emotional neglect, an incarcerated family member. That which exists in the household, particular dynamics that which exists in the household. That's how we like to think about these particular traumas. And so our spiritual care must take into consideration, how do we care for these social needs that exist in people's household? A second type of ACEs that creates a second type of social need that many people wrestle with is what we often call community needs, community social needs, community trauma, community ACEs. And so the second type of social needs that we must grapple with is that which happens in the larger community of a person, that which happens in a larger community of where a person is currently living or residing. So that is what you see in the ground of the tree, if you will, or housing quality and affordability, poverty, substandard wages, food scarcity, lack of jobs, poor water and air quality, structural racism, substandard schools, historical trauma, such as the Holocaust or African enslavement, violence, lack of social capital and mobility, discrimination. So we now have to grapple with, how does spiritual care impact or play a role in meeting the social needs that persons are currently experiencing in light of what's going on in their community? And last but not least, the third type of social need that many people must grapple with or wrestle with is that which is happening in their environment. That which is happening in their environment, such as climate crisis or natural disasters. When we think about climate crisis, we're specifically talking about record heat and droughts, wildfires and smoke, record storms, flooding and mudslides, sea level rising. When we talk about natural disasters, we must also highlight tornadoes and hurricanes, volcano eruptions, tsunamis, earthquakes, and pandemics like COVID-19. We say our spiritual care must grapple with, how do we care for these three types of social needs that people are faced with today? From that which is happening in their household, to that which is happening within their community, to that which is happening in their environment. And so what becomes our spiritual care practice to meet the needs of persons' particular social needs? I recommend, number one, a community needs assessment being completed. A community needs assessment being completed. First things first, we need to do a community needs assessment. So around our churches, our mosques, our temples, our synagogues, our faith communities, around the hospital where we're serving as a chaplain, around our communities where we're serving as pastors, what are the social service resources available for your parishioners? So you should be able to tell me if I'm one of your parishioners and I reveal to you that I'm currently being victimized and I'm currently in a domestic violence relationship, you should be able to say to me, Danielle, here are all the domestic violence shelters in the community. Here are all the drug and alcohol addiction recovery centers in the community. Here are all the social service organizations that have free job referrals and can give you job placement advice or career advice. Here are all the homeless shelters in the community. We say to address the social needs that people wrestle with, whether it's household, community, or environment. What are the social service resources? But you have to now establish, create, invent a nice little handbook or pamphlet of these resources so that when I come to you and say, hey, I'm LGBTQIA and my parents just kicked me out the house, you could say, here, Danielle, here is resources for you. Number two, we say, what new social service resource ministry is your faith community called to create? So after you do your community needs assessment, you may, as pastor of your local church, say, wow, I've been getting a lot of parishioners who are wrestling with this particular household, community, or environmental trauma or social need. Here's the new ministry now that our church needs to start. So for example, many of our seniors are wrestling with feelings of isolation in light of COVID-19, right? So in light of the third type of social need, which is an environmental social need around pandemics, right? That which is happening in our environment as a result of the current climate. We have many of our seniors wrestling with isolation. And so what would it look like for me to start a seniors ministry? The elderberries. The elderberry is a fine, very fine berry. It's sweet. It's sweet. It's a delicious berry. What would it look like for us to start the elderberry senior ministry, where maybe if we have the resources to support that, maybe once a week or maybe twice a week or 3 times a week, we can allow our seniors to come to the church for some sort of social interaction event under safe COVID-19 protocols, of course. Right? Number 3, so in addition to doing a community needs assessment, in addition to offering a new, innovative, creative social service ministry in our church, number 3, we invite you to engage in politics around, after doing your community needs assessment, or realizing that you don't have this particular social service in the community, how are you participating in local and state political legislation to challenge your local alderman, alderwoman, councilman, councilwoman, alderperson, councilperson around, hey, what our community needs is this. Because we're seeing that many of the members of our community wrestle with this social issue. And so how active are you in politics around what's going on in the community of your church or social service organization or hospital? Those are the ways in which we can really get at social needs. We also want to highlight number 4, as clergy persons, as you think about household needs, household social needs in particular, what are you doing in your preaching and teaching around these topics? So during Sunday morning worship, during Wednesday night Bible study, during Sunday morning Sunday school, how are you preaching about these household traumas? What are you really saying about the physical assault of Hagar by Sarah? What are you really saying about the rape of Bathsheba by David? How are you preaching messages that empower people around addressing their household social needs? I'll pause there. Questions, comments around social needs? First, thoughts. What's ruminating in your spirit?
We did back in the 80s, that's a long time ago, as mission person, we did through our Uptown Neighborhood Resource Center, put together a little booklet, just the way you're talking, because we had so many people coming in who didn't know where to go and what to do. And we did that several years, but then church budget and all kinds of things got in the way, and that disappeared. But you're just resurrecting, and it was very effective. And I spent some time at in housing court because we had some landlords who were not very good in the neighborhood with our director. At that one point, we had a director who worked full-time, and we had a volunteer in mission who was there at the church for 2 years. So we had 2 people out in the community working. It was good while it lasted.
That's awesome. That's awesome.
I've put up on the chat a link to the Mid-York 211 system, which is a good place to begin if you're looking for social service referrals.
Cool. In our self model, after we talked about this holistic approach of caring for the social needs of persons, now we want to move into that green bubble and talk about emotional needs of people. Emotional needs of people. Now we're discovering in light of household dysfunction, household social needs, in light of community dysfunction, community social needs, in light of environmental dysfunction, environmental social needs. We're discovering now that mental illness, sadness, depression, PTSD, anxiety is at an all-time high. We're discovering now that mental illness, mental health. We must begin to talk about mental health now more than ever, like never before. Let me give you an example. We are discovering in light of, for example, high rates of racism, police brutality that many African American persons must wrestle with now. A new term was recently invented called racial trauma. Racial trauma. It's now being recognized in the DSM-5. Racial trauma. Wonderful therapist by the name of Monica Williams has coined this term. Monica, Monica, Williams. Monica, 2 N's, Monica. Monica Williams created this new term called racial trauma. And she began to cite, hey, in light of police brutality and the disparities of racism that exist in our world today, for example, she says now many African American persons are now having high rates of mental illness, PTSD, anxiety, depression, because of the trauma of racism that they must experience. So, for example, she says when a person experiences a racist event, this now will lead to a traumatic reaction, which will then lead to a cluster of symptoms that they now wrestle with. And these cluster of symptoms include re-experiencing intrusion, avoidance, negative mood and thoughts or cognitions, and psychological arousal. And so we're saying now in the field of mental health, if there is a such thing as racial trauma that African Americans are experiencing as a result of police brutality, for example, or in other forms of racism, there's also now has to be a such thing as sexism trauma. There also has to be a such thing as homophobia trauma. There also has to be a such dynamic as ableism trauma, classism trauma, ageism trauma. That, just like racial trauma, can lead to PTSD, mental illness, high rates of depression and sadness. These same feelings also come about when persons experience other forms of isms. So if I experience a sexism event, or homophobic event, or a classism event, or ageism event, or an ableist event, I too will also experience a traumatic reaction that will also lead to a cluster of symptoms like re-experiencing intrusion, avoidance, negative mood and thought processes, and physiological arousal. And so what is the call of the chaplain or pastor? To minister to the emotional needs of persons. We encourage our pastors first and foremost to become trained in psychological first aid, PFA, psychological first aid. Please, please, please take a class and become trained in psychological first aid. Or number two, you can become trained in mental health first aid. So if you were to simply Google psychological first aid or mental health first aid, there's tons of classes that you could take, both in person and virtual, in your particular city or state. The gentleman who is known as the quote unquote father of psychological first aid is a gentleman by the name of George.
Danielle, I think you muted yourself.
Oh, thank you so much. Thank you so much. The gentleman who is known as the father of psychological first aid is a gentleman by the name of George S. Everly. 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 And George Everly created several models for examples of how to conduct psychological first aid or mental health first aid with parishioners, clients, and patients. And so several models you could investigate and learn. One model is called the SAFER model that you see here on your screen. SAFER-R. SAFER-R. This SAFER model is a wonderful psychological first aid or mental health first aid model. Another model that was created was known as the RAPID model, RAPID. It's out of Georgetown University. RAPID, the RAPID model. Another model that's very popular, that's another psychological first aid technique that many people enact, is the ASSIST model, ASSIST. The ASSIST model, ASSIST. The ASSIST model becomes a wonderful model to also use as a model for offering psychological first aid or mental health first aid. So you can Google the ASSIST model or the RAPID model or the SAFER model and learn more about those models, or you could simply take a class in psychological first aid and become trained in psychological first aid or mental health first aid. Number two, we say, how do you offer mental health resources to parishioners? So something as cool as here, pastor of the church, something as cool as in your bulletin every week, cite some websites to mental health counseling services. So for example, in many African-American circles, there's a stigma around mental health counseling. And so, for example, many African-American pastors on Sundays in the church bulletin may simply have a flyer like what you're getting ready to see on your screen that has some websites where African-American parishioners can visit to say, hey, go get some therapy, go get some counseling. So what does it look like for you to have in your Sunday worship bulletin? Websites for parishioners like psychologytoday.com, www.psychologytoday.com, which has this cool box which allows you to type in your zip code, and then a whole list of therapists in your particular zip code will pop up. And those therapists take a variety of healthcare insurance and also do sliding scales for persons. And so money is not an issue. Money is not an issue. If you have a Facebook page for your faith community, what does it look like to post websites, links on your social media page to your parishioners? What does it mean in your preaching and teaching on Sunday morning to support mental health by preaching biblical texts that support people receiving mental health? How are you theologically preaching Romans 12:2, which says, be ye transformed by the renewing of your mind? How are you theologically preaching Romans 12:2 for your congregation? The same way I am inviting you to have a pamphlet social service resources for your parishioners. I'm also inviting you to create a pamphlet or a booklet of mental health therapists where your parishioners can contact them for support services all of the time. I am an ordained clergy in the United Church of Christ. We have pastor positions for youth ministry. We have pastor positions for environmental justice. And I'm always scratching my head talking to my denomination officials saying, what would it look like if we started having on our associate pastor staff or our ministerial staff actually pastors who were trained therapists and said, now we're going to have a pastor for mental health that's going to be a part of the ministerial staff and actually offer mental health services to our parishioners. Maybe we can even afford a small stipend in our church to bring on a mental health therapist that offers free mental health services to all the parishioners of our church who are struggling emotionally. These are just a few strategies and interventions, I say, in order to care for the whole self, and we must be offering to our parishioners and to our patients. And so if you're serving as a chaplain in a hospital, I say same thing. Well, what does it look like to offer a website, a listing of websites or therapists who you can refer patients to? When we also talk about in the green circle, when we also talk about the mind needs of persons, in addition to their emotional needs, we're also talking about their life meaning and purpose needs. So when I say life meaning and purpose, what does that really mean? What I'm really referring to is, in light of social needs that people have, in light of emotional needs that people have, many people today are wrestling with, what am I called to be? What am I called to do? How are you engaging as pastor, as chaplain, as social justice activist? How are you engaging in this reflective questioning of your parishioners? How are you having one-on-ones with your parishioners saying, hey, what are you called to be and do in light of the various isms that exist in our world today? What is God or the divine or Yahweh, Allah or Buddha calling you to be or do in life today? So many people wrestle in their mind with, why am I here? What was my point for being born? What am I called to be? What am I called to do? And so I'm saying part of our care, part of offering holistic care for people is to care for people's emotional state and people's existential state or life meaning and purpose state. I'll pause there. What questions do you have around this, or what thoughts do you have around this green circle and how we care for people's emotional state or life meaning and purpose needs?
You know, it's interesting, Danielle, there was a fellow that I worked with 30 years ago, and his wife recently died. Now, he is an incredibly successful businessman, has run 3 or 4 very successful technology businesses. His wife died. He's at this transition point in his life. And even as someone who is over 70, he is asking this question. Mm-hmm. What is my purpose now? Who am I now? So it is, there is no age limitation on this question.
Yes, yes, yes. Yes, yes, yes.
I want to go back to something. You started off by talking about community needs assessments. Do you have some kind of assessment tool that you might recommend to us?
Yes, we often say in the field of chaplaincy, there's 5 things that you want to do to offer community needs assessment. Number 1, first and foremost, you got to get out and knock on some doors in the community to ask people, hey, what do you need? What do you think your community needs? And so some churches do that in the form of a town hall meeting where you host a community town hall where people come to your church. And first and foremost, you get their insight, wisdom, input. Very important to have the input of the community in this. Number two, at the town hall, you begin to, number two, find out, well, what's the strengths? What do you already have? Because oftentimes we discovered when we do community needs assessment, many people are in need of things that really are already in existence in the community. We just need some connecting of dots or connecting of people to other people. Number three, we want to highlight, after we think about, okay, this is what we need, and it's currently not in existence because we've already checked in about what is in existence in our community. Number three, we highlight, okay, what's the top 1, 2, or 3 things we need? Because sometimes there could be 20 things that are generated. We think about what we need that's currently not in existence. And we may not be able to address all 20. Maybe right now we need to start off with what's the most important? What is the most dire need under constraint that we need to address now? And then number 4 is, how do we bring in political leaders? How do we bring in political leaders to voice our needs and say, okay, we've held this town hall, we've knocked on doors, we've checked in with people. This is what people said they needed that is not currently in existence. And of all the needs we discern we need, these are the top 1, 2, or 3 things. How can you invest in this community to bring those top 1, 2, or 3 things into fruition? So one way of doing that is connecting with political leaders for financial investments. Number 2, connecting with the businesses to give a financial investment. And if there's people outside of the local government, how do you connect with state government? And then last but not least, number 5 is, how do you give ownership of that to the community? So oftentimes we've discovered when we bring in politicians or businesses to help fund that particular need, they will then bring in somebody from outside the community to now create it. So now the community no longer becomes a stakeholder to that. So then how do you figure out a way to make sure that you're holding outside sources accountable by saying, this has to be run though by the community. The community needs to remain a stakeholder in this. So that's the general model that we follow in that.
Danielle, I've got the impression you have a lot more to share with us. But I think we're at the end of our time for today. Maybe we could have you come back at a future date and tell us more, because this is really, really
Sure. The last and final piece, I just need 1 minute, is around the F, the faith needs on this image. So I talked about the social needs, the emotional needs, life, meaning, and purpose needs. And last but not least, the F in our acronym stands for faith needs. And what we have discovered is there are, unfortunately, 3 unhealthy theological belief systems that people wrestle with. There's 3 unhealthy theological belief systems that people wrestle with. And we need you as clergy to attack these bad theological belief systems. We say, in some sense, people either believe that their crisis or illness is a punishment from God, or their crisis or illness is a test from God, or their crisis or illness is not a concern for God at all. And there's a spirit of indifference that God has to their particular concern. And so the faith needs of persons are for you to address these unhealthy, inaccurate, unethical theological belief systems and simply remind people, no, this is not a punishment. No, COVID-19 is not a punishment from God. No, COVID-19 is not a test from God. No, COVID-19 is not an issue that God is not concerned about for you. God is with you during this time.
Man.
So thank you. Thank you
Thank
very
you.
much.
Danielle, is there a prayer you could offer as we leave today?
Sure. Let us pray. Most holy and divine one, we say thank you. Thank you in these moments for your spirit being with us. Thank you for the wisdom and the insight that we've shared with each other during our time together. And now we ask that you spark in us a sense of creativity to do ministry anew. Create in us resources that will partner with us. Create for us resources that will come alongside us in this new work. And let us never grow weary in well-doing, but keep us encouraged in ministry, especially during these most difficult times. Remind us of our passion and our call. Remind us of what led us to this moment of wanting to move and be and feel called to ministry. Give us that passion again. Reignite our hope. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.
Danielle, thank you so much.
Thank you.
This is very,
Thank
very
you,
rich.
thank you. I had a blast. Thank you.
All right, friends. The Lord be with you.
Also with you.
Bye now.